Hello, and a huge welcome to the channel. If you're looking for cross-dressing stories that are emotional, intriguing, and truly empowering, you've come to the right place. When I became her to survive, it started, as so many disasters do, with a piece of paper, not a bang, not a crash, but the quiet, sinister slide of an envelope through the mail slot. I didn't even look at it at first. I was too busy staring at the wall, my mind a blank, buzzing void. The factory had laid off another 30 guys that morning. I was one of them. For the first time in my adult life, I was unemployed. My hands, calloused from a decade of operating a metal press, felt useless and soft. The silence in our small apartment was deafening. It was the kind of quiet that's so heavy you can feel it pressing on your eardrums. That's when I saw the envelope on the floor. It was a nasty shade of pink, almost screaming for attention. I picked it up. My name, Ethan Miller, was printed on the front, right above a bold, terrifying declaration: final eviction notice. The words swam in front of my eyes. 10 days. We had 10 days to pay 3 months of back rent or get out. My breath hitched in my chest. A tight, painful knot. It felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. I actually stumbled back and slid down the wall, the rough texture of the plaster scratching my back through my thin t-shirt. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A blocked number. I almost ignored it, but some grim instinct made me answer. "Is this Ethan Miller?" a voice asked, crisp and devoid of any emotion. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is John from Sterling Collections. Regarding your overdue loan with the bank, I'm calling to inform you that your case has been moved to our legal department for processing." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? The world was collapsing, and I was just a guy sitting on the floor of his apartment, watching it happen. "Mr. Miller, are you there?" I hung up. I dropped the phone on the worn-out rug, and it clattered with a cheap plastic sound. I buried my face in my hands. I was 29 years old. I was a factory worker, a man who was supposed to be a provider, and now I couldn't even keep a roof over our heads. I couldn't afford the rent. I couldn't afford Lila's medication for her asthma. The weight of it all was crushing me, turning my bones to dust. I was failing at everything. That's how Lila found me. She walked in, her arms full of a single grocery bag, all we could afford for the next few days, and stopped dead. Her face, usually so full of life and warmth, crumpled with worry. "Ethan, honey, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger at the pink notice on the floor. She set the bag down and picked it up. I watched her read it, her shoulders slumping with each word. She didn't cry. Lila was stronger than that. She just stood there, the paper shaking in her hand, her knuckles white. She came and sat next to me on the floor, wrapping her arms around me. We didn't talk for a long time. There were no words for this kind of failure. It was a pit, dark and deep, and we were both at the bottom of it. After what felt like an hour, she stirred. She had her phone in her hand, her thumb scrolling absently through some job search app. It was a habit, a nervous tic we'd both developed over the past few months as things got tight. "This is insane," she whispered. More to herself than to me. "The pay it's unbelievable." "What is it?" I mumbled, my voice muffled by her shoulder. She held the phone out. Her hand was shaking. I focused on the screen. The ad was for a live-in housekeeper position at a place called the Ramirez Estate. The salary was listed in bold $4,000 a month. $4,000 a month. It was more money than I'd ever made. It was enough to cover the back rent in 2 months. It was enough for Lila's medicine. for groceries, for a life where we weren't constantly holding our breath, waiting for the next blow. It was a lifeline. And then I saw the catch. It was right there in the description. Seeking a dedicated and experienced female housekeeper for a prominent residence, the ideal candidate will possess a keen eye for detail, a quiet demeanor, and impeccable standards of cleanliness. This is a female-only position. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. It was a sound with no humor in it. Well, that's that. It's a job for a woman. Lila, they want a housekeeper, a maid, not some guy who smells like motor oil. I know, but $4,000, Ethan. I'm a man. Lila, I said, maybe a little too sharply. They're gonna take one look at me and know. My hands, my face, my voice. It's a joke. She didn't answer. She just sat there, looking at me. Her gaze was intense, analytical, the way she got when she was trying to solve a puzzle. She looked at my jawline, my shoulders, my hands. It was a long, unsettling silence. My heart started to beat a little faster, a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Then we'll just have to make sure they don't recognize you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air between us. They felt heavy, insane. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for her to say she was kidding. But she wasn't. Her expression was dead serious. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice cracking. I'm talking about saving our home, she said, her own voice gaining a sliver of desperate strength. I'm talking about an opportunity. It's crazy. I know. It's insane. But what other choice do we have? Ethan, are we going to be on the street in 10 days? I felt my heart plummet. It wasn't just falling. It was crashing, leaving a hollow, icy void in its place. The idea was preposterous. It was a fantasy, a script from a bad movie. Me, pretending to be a woman. It was impossible. But then I looked around our apartment. I saw the framed photo of our wedding day on the bookshelf. I saw the little ceramic bird Lila had bought at a flea market because she said it looked happy. I saw the life we had built, a life that was about to be ripped away from us. And in that moment of pure, undiluted desperation, a tiny, terrifying thought took root in my mind. What if we could actually pull it off? That was the moment it all began. Not with a plan, not with any real hope, but with a single, insane question born from the depths of despair. It was the moment Ethan Miller started to fade, and someone else, someone I hadn't even met yet, began to take his place. Lila didn't waste any time. It was like a switch had been flipped inside her. Her fear was still there. I could see it in the tightness around her eyes, but it was being overshadowed by a fierce, almost terrifying resolve. That night, she sat at our small kitchen table with a notepad and a pen. Okay, she said, the words sharp and final. We need a new identity, a whole new person. She scribbled at the top of the page. Her name is Emily, Emily Rivera. It sounds gentle, professional. It's common enough not to draw attention. Emily Rivera. It sounded like the name of a stranger. Which, I guess, was the point. The whole thing still felt like a fever dream. But watching Lila work, I couldn't help but get swept up in the current of her determination. It was either this or drown. The next day, the physical transformation began. Lila called it laying the foundation. I called it the strangest and most uncomfortable day of my life. It started with the razor. I'd been shaving my face since I was a teenager. But this was different. After she was done with my face, she handed me the shaving cream and a new razor. Everything, she said, her voice clinical. Arms, legs, chest. Everything has to be smooth. The sensation was bizarre. My skin, usually covered in a light dusting of hair, felt alien to me. It was slick, unnervingly smooth under my own touch. When a breeze from the open window hit my legs, I shivered. It felt like my entire body had become hypersensitive, every nerve ending exposed to the world for the first time. Next came the eyebrows. She sat me down on a stool in the bathroom, a pair of tweezers in her hand. "This is going to hurt," she warned. She wasn't kidding. Each pluck was a sharp, stinging pinch. She worked with intense concentration, reshaping my thick, straight brows into a softer, more delicate arch. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands gripping the edge of the stool until my knuckles were white. When she was done, she handed me a mirror. The man looking back at me was different. The change was subtle, just a slight curve where there used to be a straight line, but it softened my whole expression. It was the first time I felt a genuine jolt of unease. My own face was starting to look like it belonged to someone else. The most challenging part of that first day, though, was the corset. Lila had bought it online with the last of our emergency credit card balance. It was a formidable piece of engineering, all laces and boning. "This will give you a waist," she explained. Holding it up, it's the most important part of the silhouette. She had me hold on to the doorframe as she laced me into it from behind, pulling the strings tighter and tighter. The pressure was immense. I couldn't take a full breath. It felt like a vice was squeezing my torso, pushing my ribs into a new, unnatural position. I gasped, trying to draw in air. I can't breathe. Lila." "You'll get used to it," she said, though she sounded a little worried herself. "Just take small, shallow breaths. From your chest, not your stomach." It was agonizing. A dull, constant ache settled into my ribs. But she was right. It did create a waist. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the shape was undeniably different. Less of a blocky, masculine frame, and more of a subtle hourglass. Then came the silicone breast forms. She'd ordered them from the same website. They were heavy and cool to the touch. She showed me how to slip them into the pockets of a special padded bra. The sensation of them pressing against my skin was just weird. A cold, gelatinous weight on my chest. They looked surprisingly real under the clothing. A subtle but definite feminine shape on my otherwise masculine frame. Lila then handed me a pair of sheer stockings. The material felt impossibly thin and delicate in my rough hands. "Careful," she warned. "They'll run easily." Sliding them on was another alien experience. The smooth, silky fabric glided over my newly bare legs, feeling like a second skin. It was nothing like the coarse denim of my work jeans or the soft cotton of sweatpants. My legs looked different, smoother, more defined in a way I'd never seen before. The final piece of the physical construction was the wig. It was long, falling just past my shoulders. In a soft mocha brown color, Lila carefully placed it on my head, adjusting it so the hairline looked natural. The weight of it was the first thing I noticed. Then, as I turned my head, strands of hair brushed against my cheek and the back of my neck. I flinched, a full-body shiver running down my spine. I'd never had hair long enough to touch my shoulders. The sensation was distracting, a constant, soft reminder that this wasn't my body. I was wearing a costume. When I looked in the mirror this time, with the corset, the bra, the stockings, and the wig, I saw a stranger's silhouette. It was a tall, slightly awkward woman with broad shoulders, but the shape was there. It was the outline of a woman, but the face was still mine, just with better eyebrows. That was about to change. "Sit," Lila commanded, pointing to the stool again. She laid out an arsenal of brushes, palettes, and tubes on the bathroom counter. It looked like a painter's toolkit. Now for the hard part. Don't move. For the next hour, she worked on my face with the focus of a surgeon, She started with a cool, liquid foundation that smelled faintly of flowers, blending it into my skin and erasing the day-old stubble shadow and the slight redness on my nose. The feeling of the soft sponge dabbing at my face was oddly soothing. Then came the contouring. "Your jaw is too strong," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "We need to soften it." She used a darker powder to create shadows along my jawline and at my temples, and a lighter one, a highlighter, to draw a thin, straight line down the bridge of my nose, making it appear narrower. She chose a palette of soft pastel eyeshadows, pinks and light browns to give my eyes a gentler, wider appearance. The tickle of the brush on my eyelids made me want to flinch, but I held still, trusting her. She finished with a thin line of brown eyeliner. "Not black," she said, because it was less harsh, and a coat of mascara that made my short, unremarkable lashes look longer and thicker. The last step was the lipstick. It was a simple, light pink shade, with a coat of clear gloss over it. My lips felt slick and slightly sticky. "Okay," she said, her voice soft with a hint of awe. "You can look now." I took a deep breath, or as deep a breath as the corset would allow, and opened my eyes. And my world tilted on its axis. The person looking back at me from the mirror was not Ethan Miller. It was someone else entirely. Her face was oval-shaped, with large, soft brown eyes. Her lips were full and slightly shiny. Her jaw was there, but it didn't seem as square or aggressive. The combination of the arched eyebrows, the subtle makeup, and the cascade of mocha-colored hair had completely erased the man I knew. This was Emily Rivera, and she was pretty. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I raised a hand to my face, and her hand moved in the mirror. I touched my cheek, my skin feeling impossibly smooth under my fingertips. A tremor started in my hand and spread through my entire body. I was shaking. It was a deep, uncontrollable shudder born of pure, unadulterated shock. My mind was screaming, "That's not me." But my eyes were telling a different story. It was terrifying. I felt a wave of nausea and panic. What were we doing? This was insane. I was a fraud, a man in a costume. And any second, the whole illusion would shatter. But underneath the panic, there was something else. A flicker of something. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't pleasure. It was a strange sense of detachment, of being hidden. The man in the mirror, Ethan, the one with the eviction notice and the collection agency calls, was gone. In his place was this woman, Emily. And in that moment, she had none of his problems. This soft, unfamiliar shell felt safe. "Okay, now we practice." Lila's voice cut through my trance. The next few days were a blur of training. Lila became my coach, my director, my harshest critic. She made me walk up and down our tiny living room in a pair of low, sensible heels she'd bought. "Stop stomping. Ethan, you're not walking into a factory. Lighter steps. Move from your hips. Let them sway a little. Not that much. You look like you're trying to put out a fire." It was exhausting. Every natural instinct I had was wrong. I had to learn to sit, to stand, to bend over without looking like a man. She made me practice household chores. "No, she'd say as I grabbed a broom. "Don't grip it like a baseball bat. Hold it gently. Your movements need to be efficient, but graceful." We spent hours on the voice. My normal speech was too low, too gravelly. She made me practice speaking in a higher register, not a fake falsetto, but a softer, breathier tone. I had to repeat phrases over and over again. The one for the interview was the most important. "Buenos dias. Señora Ramirez." I'd say, my voice cracking. Softer, Lila would command, more respectful, put a little smile in your voice. Buenos dias, Señora Ramirez. I'd try again, the sounds feeling foreign and ridiculous in my mouth. By the end of the week, I was emotionally and physically drained. I felt like an actor rehearsing for the most important role of his life, a role he was certain he was going to fail. On the night before the interview, Lila put me through a final dress rehearsal. I was wearing the complete Emily ensemble, a simple dark blue maid's uniform, the sheer stockings, the low heels. My face was fully made up, the wig perfectly in place. I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling like a doll. Lila circled me, her critical gaze taking in every detail. She adjusted the collar on my dress, tucked a stray hair behind my ear. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at me. Her professional demeanor seemed to melt away, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Her cheeks had a faint pink blush. Ethan, I mean, Emily, she stammered, catching herself. You look prettier than I thought you would. The comment caught me off guard. It wasn't a compliment from my wife to her husband. It felt like something else. Something spoken to the woman standing in front of her. A strange heat rose in my own cheeks. For the first time. This didn't feel like just a desperate, crazy plan. It felt real. And the reality of it was more bewildering than I could have ever imagined. There was an odd, unexpected current of attraction in the air. A bizarre fascination with the transformation. She reached out and gently touched my cheek, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw that she had so carefully softened with makeup. You can do this, she whispered, her voice full of a hope that I desperately wanted to borrow. You just have to be her. Just for a little while. I looked at her, my tough, beautiful wife, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could. The Ramirez estate wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Wrought iron gates glided open as my taxi pulled up, revealing a long, winding driveway lined with immaculate rose bushes. The mansion itself was a sprawling Spanish-style behemoth of white stucco and red tile, looking like it had been plucked from the hills of Andalusia and dropped into the most expensive part of the city. My heart was a frantic drum against the steel cage of my corset. Every shallow breath I took was a conscious effort. I paid the driver with trembling hands, my fingers fumbling with the cash. As I stepped out onto the pristine cobblestone driveway, the low heels felt treacherous, threatening to betray me with every step. I smoothed down the front of my simple black dress, the one Lila had chosen for the interview, conservative, professional, and utterly anonymous. The massive oak front door was opened before I could even ring the bell. A stern-looking woman in a crisp grey uniform eyed me up and down. Emily Rivera, she asked. Her voice clipped. Yes, that's me, I squeaked, my voice coming out at least an octave higher than I intended. I cleared my throat and tried again, aiming for the soft, measured tone Lila and I had practiced. Yes, I'm here to see Mrs. Ramirez. She led me through a cavernous foyer with a marble floor so polished I could see my own terrified reflection in it. The air smelled of lemon oil and old money. We didn't stop in a sitting room or an office. Instead, she led me straight into a massive sun-drenched kitchen. And there she was. Mrs. Veronica Ramirez was in her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back into an elegant, severe bun. She wore a simple but obviously expensive silk blouse and tailored trousers. She wasn't looking at me. She was intently polishing a single silver teaspoon with a soft cloth. She didn't acknowledge my presence for a full 30 seconds, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Finally, she set the spoon down and turned her head. Her eyes were a piercing shade of dark blue, and as they scanned me from head to toe, I felt like I was being X-rayed. It was a gaze that didn't miss a thing. I felt my disguise starting to fray at the edges, convinced she could see the man cowering beneath the wig and makeup. "So," she said, her voice smooth and cultured, "you believe you have what it takes to manage my home, Miss Rivera?" It wasn't a question. "I do, ma'am," I replied, keeping my own gaze respectfully lowered, just as Lila had instructed. "We'll see," she said. What followed wasn't an interview, it was an audition, a series of brutal, silent tests. First, she pointed to a small, almost invisible scuff mark on the marble floor. "Clean that." She ordered a bucket, a cloth, and 3 different unmarked bottles of cleaning solution were already sitting on the counter. It was a test. I remembered an article Lila had made me read online. Never mix chemicals. Start with the gentlest solution. I chose the clearest liquid, applied a small amount to the cloth, and began to work on the floor using the 3-step method Lila had drilled into me, a circular motion to lift the stain, a straight wipe to clear the residue, and a final buff with a dry part of the cloth to shine. I did it all from a kneeling position, trying to keep my back straight and my movements graceful, acutely aware of her eyes on me the entire time. Next, she led me to a linen closet stacked high with towels. "Fold these," she said, pointing to a messy pile on a table. "Hotel standard." My hands, which were used to gripping heavy machinery, suddenly felt clumsy and huge. I took a deep breath and began, folding each towel into the tight, perfect rectangles I had practiced with our own worn-out bath towels for hours. She tested me on setting a tea table, arranging flowers, and even how I drew the heavy velvet curtains in the library, a single, smooth pull, no indecisive tugging. Each task was a minefield. The corset was digging into my ribs, my feet were aching in the heels, and a single drop of sweat was threatening to trail down my temple and ruin my makeup. I was performing femininity under a microscope, and it was the most demanding physical work I had ever done. Finally, she led me to her private study. It was a beautiful room, filled with books and antique furniture. She sat down behind a large mahogany desk and gestured for me to take the chair opposite her. For the first time since I arrived, she looked at me not as a potential employee, but as a person, and it was terrifying. She folded her hands on the desk and leaned forward slightly, her sharp blue eyes locked onto mine. "Is there anything you want to be completely honest with me about?" "Emily," she asked, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. My blood ran cold. The world stopped. This was it. She knew. The game was up. I could feel the truth clawing its way up my throat, a desperate confession ready to burst out. My carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "I'm a man. My name is Ethan. My wife is sick, and we're about going to be homeless," a voice screamed inside my head. I opened my mouth, ready for the dam to break. My entire body tensed for the impact of the confession. But then, after 3 seconds that stretched into an eternity, a warm, genuine laugh filled the room. Mrs. Ramirez leaned back in her chair, a smile softening the severe lines of her face. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, her tone suddenly kind. "You're just terrified, aren't you? I like that. It means you care. You're not overconfident. You take this seriously." The relief that washed over me was so total, so absolute, that I almost passed out. I felt lightheaded, my vision swimming for a second. She thought my existential terror was just a bad case of nerves. "Emily," she said, her voice turning professional again. "You're hired. Your duties begin tomorrow evening. 6 p.m. Sharp. You will have a room here on the 3rd floor." I was speechless. I just nodded. A stupid, jerky movement of my head. I had done it. I had pulled off the impossible. I had saved my family. But as I walked out of that mansion, the setting sun casting a long, feminine shadow in front of me, I felt a cold dread mix with the relief. The cost of this salvation was my own identity. I had to kill Ethan Miller so that Emily Rivera could live. And I had no idea if I would be able to find him again when this was all over. My life split into two, by day. I was Ethan, a ghost haunting the city's day labor offices. I'd stand in line with other desperate men, my hands raw, my body aching from a few hours of hauling drywall or digging ditches for cash under the table. I was invisible, another down-on-his-luck guy, my face grim, my shoulders slumped under the weight of the world. The men I worked with talked about sports and women, and I'd just nod along, a stranger in my own skin. But every day, around 4:30, I would come home, scrub the grime from under my fingernails, and begin the ritual. The transformation into Emily became a ceremony, a structured process that marked the boundary between my two lives. Each step was a layer, not just of clothing, but of personality. It started with the corset, the familiar vice-like hug as I laced it tight, forcing my posture to change, my breathing to become shallow and controlled. It was a physical reminder, you are not Ethan anymore. Ethan breathes from his belly, Emily breathes from her chest. Then came the soft whisper of the silk stockings sliding up my legs, held in place by a garter belt whose delicate clasps I could now fasten with my eyes closed. The sensation of the lace against my skin was a world away from the rough canvas of work pants. The padded bra and silicone forms came next, settling a now familiar weight onto my chest. I would put on the simple black uniform with its crisp white apron. It felt like a suit of armor. And finally, the wig. The moment the soft mocha hair fell around my shoulders, the transformation was complete. I would look in the mirror, and Ethan would be gone, replaced by the quiet, competent face of Emily Rivera. The psychological shift was as stark as the physical one. The desperation and exhaustion of my day dissolved, replaced by Emily's calm focus. Life at the Ramirez estate was an alternate reality. The house was a quiet, orderly universe, and Mrs. Ramirez was its son. My duties were demanding, but clear. I cleaned. I polished. I organized. I learned to anticipate her needs. To have her afternoon tea ready the moment she returned from her charity meetings, to ensure the flowers in the foyer were always fresh. And a strange thing began to happen. Mrs. Ramirez started to talk to me. At first, it was just small things, comments about the weather, or an instruction about dinner. But soon, she began to confide in me. She'd sit in the kitchen while I polished the silver, telling me about her late husband, about her estranged son, about the petty dramas of her social circle. "You're a good listener. Emily, dear," she told me one evening, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. It's a rare quality. No one had ever called Ethan Miller a good listener. No one had ever called me dear. In my world, men didn't talk about their feelings. They grunted, postured, and competed. But as Emily, I was a confidant. I was valued not for my strength, but for my quiet presence, my patience, my attention to detail. And the most dangerous thing of all started to happen. I began to like it. I liked the peace and quiet of the mansion. I liked the satisfaction of a perfectly folded napkin, a gleaming floor. I liked the feeling of the soft uniform against my skin. I liked the respect in Mrs. Ramirez's voice. In this house, as this woman, I was competent. I was appreciated. I was successful. As Ethan, I was none of those things. The transition back to being Ethan at 2 a.m. became the hardest part of my day. Peeling off the layers felt like ripping off a protective skin. The wig came off, and my short, thinning hair was a shock. The makeup was wiped away, revealing my tired, masculine face. The corset was unlaced, and with a deep, shuddering gasp of a full breath, the crushing weight of my real life came flooding back in. I was no longer the valued Emily. I was just Ethan, the failure, the imposter, lying in the dark next to his sleeping wife, the scent of her perfume a faint, alien smell on his skin. The line began to blur on a Tuesday. I was at home, making coffee in the morning, still dressed as Ethan in an old t-shirt and jeans. I reached for a mug on the top shelf, and instead of just grabbing it, I found myself rising onto the balls of my feet, my back straight, my arm extending in a graceful arc. It was a movement I had perfected as Emily to avoid wrinkling my uniform. I froze, my hand hovering in the air, a sudden cold shock running through me. It wasn't a conscious thought, it was muscle memory. My body had learned to be Emily even when my mind wasn't. Later that week, as I was looking in the bathroom mirror, getting ready to head out for another grueling day of searching for temp work, I noticed a smudge on the glass. I picked up a cloth to wipe it and, looking at my reflection, I thought to myself, I need to make sure she looks presentable. For a split second, I didn't realize who she was. She was me. I had referred to my own reflection as a woman. Lila saw it, too. She didn't say anything at first, but I could feel her watching me. She saw the way I started to unconsciously hold my hands, my fingers resting together delicately instead of clenched in a fist. She saw the way I'd catch a glimpse of myself in a shop window and instinctively check my hair, even though it was just my own short buzz cut. The breaking point came one Saturday. There was no work, and I didn't have to be at the estate until evening. I was just Ethan, all day, and I was miserable. The pressure was suffocating. The bills were still piled up, a constant, silent accusation on the kitchen table. I was short with Lila, pacing the small apartment like a caged animal. Finally, she cornered me in the bedroom. "What's wrong with you, Ethan?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "You're a million miles away." "It's nothing," I grumbled, turning away. "Just tired." "No, it's more than that," she insisted. She walked over to the closet and pulled out the hanger where one of Emily's uniforms was hanging. "You haven't been yourself since this started. You're quieter, and I don't know, softer. Sometimes, even when you're you." I finally broke. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. "I don't know what's happening to me, Lila," I whispered, the words ragged. "When I'm out there, trying to find work, I'm just nothing, another useless guy. They look right through me. The world is hard and loud, and it just beats you down." I looked up at her, my eyes pleading for her to understand. "But when I'm Emily, everything is different. The world is quieter. People are kinder. Mrs. Ramirez, she talks to me. She listens to me. As Emily, I can fix things. I can make things clean and orderly. Everything is simple. Everything makes sense. It's easier to breathe." I expected to see fear in her eyes, or jealousy, or even disgust. But instead, I saw a deep, aching sadness. She came and sat next to me, taking my rough hand in hers. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, "you're not finding it easier to be a woman. You're finding it easier to be someone who's valued." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't jealous of Emily. She was worried about Ethan. She was worried that the man she loved was disappearing into a role that was born out of desperation, a role that was now offering him a piece he couldn't find as himself. Our relationship started to shift. It wasn't about the frantic, desperate plan anymore. It became something quieter, more intimate. Sometimes, when I was dressed as Emily, getting ready for work, she would come and help me with the clasp on a necklace or adjust my wig. There were moments of strange, gentle intimacy in those gestures. She wasn't just my wife helping her husband. It was two people in an impossible situation, finding a new way to connect. She was exploring this new, softer side of the man she loved, a side that only Emily was allowed to show the world. And in her acceptance, I found a small anchor in the swirling confusion of my own identity. I was no longer just Ethan pretending. Emily was becoming a real part of who I was. About a month into my tenure, Mrs. Ramirez made a special request. She was hosting her annual charity gala at the estate, a massive affair for the city's elite. "I won't be needing you to clean that night. Emily," she said, her tone businesslike, "I'll need you at the front, assisting me, greeting guests, taking coats, ensuring everything runs smoothly. You'll need to look the part." Look. The part was an understatement. The next day, a box arrived from a high-end boutique. Inside was a dress that took my breath away. It was a floor-length gown of deep, midnight blue satin that shimmered under the light. It was elegant and simple from the front, but the back was cut daringly low, a soft cowl that would expose the smooth skin of my back down to the top of the corseted waist. The skirt was cut to cling, designed to hug the hips and flare out slightly at the bottom. When Lila helped me into it that night, zipping it up over the most restrictive corset I had ever worn, I looked in the mirror and felt a genuine surge of panic. The woman staring back at me was a complete stranger. She was elegant, poised, and beautiful. The dress, combined with the corset and the breast forms, created a stunning, classically feminine silhouette. My broad shoulders, which I was always so conscious of, were balanced by the soft curves the dress created. With my hair swept up in an elegant twist and the subtle, smoky makeup Lila had applied, I was unrecognizable. This wasn't a maid's uniform. This was a transformation into a different class, a different world. I wanted to tear it off and run. The gala was a whirlwind of champagne, quiet orchestral music, and the low hum of powerful people making conversation. I stood near Mrs. Ramirez, my posture perfect, a polite, serene smile fixed on my face. I took coats made of cashmere and fur, my movements fluid and practiced. And for the first time, I was seen, not as a servant, but as a woman. Several older, distinguished-looking men smiled at me, their eyes lingering with an appreciative gleam. "You look lovely tonight, my dear," one of them murmured as I took his coat. Later in the evening, a gentleman in his 60s with kind eyes and a silver mane of hair approached me. "I hope this isn't too forward," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "But my wife is busy with her charities, and they are playing my favorite waltz. Would you do me the honor of a dance?" My heart leaped into my throat. I couldn't, but Mrs. Ramirez, who was standing nearby, gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. Terrified, I placed my hand in his. He led me to the dance floor, his hand resting gently on the bare skin of my lower back. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that made my cheeks flush with a real, unfaked blush. We moved slowly to the music, his steps confident and easy to follow. He was a perfect gentleman, but the intimacy of the moment, the polite compliments he paid me, the way he looked at Emily, was profoundly unsettling. He was attracted to a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. And the fact that the illusion was working so perfectly was the most terrifying part of all. As he led me off the floor, I slipped away to a quiet corner of the terrace to catch my breath. It was there that I overheard two men talking, their voices carrying on the cool night air. "It's all about finding your purpose, your authentic self," one of them said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Once you know who you really are, you can't go back to pretending." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Authentic self. Who was I? Was I Ethan, the broken man who couldn't pay his rent? Or was I Emily, the graceful, beautiful woman being complimented by strangers at a high society gala I had been pretending for so long that I wasn't sure anymore? I had gone so far down this rabbit hole that I had lost sight of the entrance. Standing there in my borrowed beauty, I had never felt more like a fraud. I realized with sickening clarity that I couldn't keep living this lie. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was consuming me. After the last guest had departed, a profound and heavy silence settled over the mansion. The staff were quietly clearing away the remnants of the party, but I didn't join them. I stood in the grand foyer, the midnight blue satin of the gown feeling like a lead weight. My heart was pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't take the dress off. I couldn't wipe away the makeup. I couldn't go back to being Ethan. Not until I had done this. I found Mrs. Ramirez in her study. She was sitting in her leather armchair, a small glass of brandy in her hand, looking exhausted but pleased. "Ah, Emily," she said, smiling wearily. "You were wonderful tonight. A true asset." I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing in the silent room. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my hands clasped in front of me, my entire body trembling. My carefully constructed composure had shattered. Her smile faded as she saw my expression. "Emily, what is it? Are you all right?" Tears started to well in my eyes, hot and unstoppable. They traced paths through my foundation, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. This had to be real. All of it. "My name," I began. My voice a choked, broken thing that was neither Ethan's nor Emily's. "Is not Emily." The confusion on her face was painful to watch. "What are you talking about?" And then it all came out, the whole sordid, desperate story. The layoff, the eviction notice, Lila's medical bills, the job ad, the insane plan. I told her everything. My voice cracking, tears streaming down my face, ruining the beautiful makeup Lila had so carefully applied. I was no longer the poised woman from the gala, nor was I the quiet, competent housekeeper. I was just a terrified man in a dress, confessing the biggest lie of his life. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Mrs. Ramirez stared at me, her face a mask of stone. I could see the emotions warring in her eyes, shock, disbelief, and a deep, cutting sense of betrayal. I had not just lied to her. I had made a fool of her. I braced myself for the explosion, for the anger, for the call to the police. I had committed fraud. I deserved whatever came next. She put her brandy glass down with a sharp click. She stood up and walked over to me, stopping just a few feet away. I flinched, expecting her to scream, maybe even to strike me. Instead, she just looked at me for a long, agonizing moment, her gaze taking in the tear-streaked face, the elegant gown, the trembling hands. "All that time," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "All those conversations in the kitchen. It was all a lie. The situation was real." I sobbed. "The desperation was real. The work I did my best. I never meant to disrespect you." She was silent for another minute. I watched her process it all, saw the hard anger in her eyes slowly soften into something else, something more complex. She was looking past the dress, past the lie, and seeing the person underneath. "The young woman who folded my towels perfectly," she said, more to herself than to me. "The one who remembered how I take my tea without being told twice. The one who listened to an old woman ramble on about her regrets. That person wasn't a lie. Were they?" I shook my head, unable to speak. She let out a long, slow breath, a sound of profound weariness. "I may have been mistaken about your identity," she said, her voice regaining some of its strength. "But I do not believe I was mistaken about your character." She walked back to her desk and stood behind it, a queen on her throne, deciding my fate. My life hung in the balance of her next words. "You have put me in an impossible position," she said. "But I am not a cruel woman." She looked me straight in the eye, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "If you wish to continue working here, you may, but the deception ends tonight. You will come to work as yourself. You can be Ethan or you can be Emily. The choice is yours. I will not force you." I collapsed, not to the floor, but inwardly. The strength that had held me together dissolved, and I just stood there, a weeping, broken man in a beautiful blue dress, humbled by an act of mercy I had in no way earned. She was offering me not just a job, but a choice, a chance to decide who I was meant to be. I didn't go back to the day labor lines. The thought of returning to that world of gritty, masculine anonymity felt like a step backward, like a betrayal of everything I had discovered. After a long, tearful conversation with Lila, a conversation filled with more honesty than we had shared in years, I knew what I had to do. I used the money I had so carefully saved to start my own business. Mrs. Ramirez, in an act of extraordinary faith, became my first client and provided a glowing reference that opened doors I never could have imagined. I registered the company, a name that came to me in a moment of clarity, E&E Cleaners, Ethan and Emily. My life found a new rhythm, one that wasn't split between two desperate extremes. It was integrated. On days when a client needed heavy furniture moved or carpets deep cleaned with industrial machines, I would arrive as Ethan, in practical work, pants and a polo shirt bearing my new company logo. My hands were still rough, but now they were the hands of a business owner, not a desperate laborer. And on days when a client needed a home prepared for a delicate event, a meticulous deep clean of fine china and silver, or the kind of detailed, thoughtful organization that had earned Mrs. Ramirez's trust, I would arrive as Emily. Her uniform was now a crisp, professional gray. Her hair was always neat, her movements calm and efficient. She was no longer a disguise born of desperation. She was the face of the premium, detail-oriented side of my business. She represented a skill set I had earned, a part of myself I was no longer ashamed of. Lila was my partner in all of it. She managed the books, answered the calls, and was the unshakable foundation on which I rebuilt my life. Our love, which had been tested by poverty and deception, was now stronger and deeper. We were a team, navigating a world that didn't have a map for people like us. One evening, I was sitting in our small office, a converted spare room, in a new slightly bigger apartment we could now afford. I was looking at the two uniforms hanging side by side on a hook on the wall, Ethan's sturdy work shirt and Emily's pristine grey dress. They weren't in opposition to each other. They were two halves of a whole, two sides of the same story. Layla came in and wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind, resting her chin on my head. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. I reached up and held her hand. "I'm thinking about how it all started," I said, my voice quiet. "I thought I had to become someone else to survive. I thought I had to pretend to be a woman to save our home." I looked at the reflection of our two faces in the darkened window. My own face no longer a source of confusion, but just mine. "I started this journey because I was desperate," I said, turning to look at her, my heart full. "But I'm ending it by finding the whole of myself. I wasn't just Ethan, the factory worker, and I wasn't just Emily, the housekeeper. I was both. One was born of struggle and the other of circumstance, but together, they had made me complete. Together, they had set me free.